Dear people watching and listening, Assalamu alaikum. Kindly like and share this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Kindly support my channel by contributing to my Patreon account so that I can continue making such audiobooks for you. The Muslim Conquest of Persia by Lieutenant General A.I. Akram. This book tells in detail about the Arab conquest of Persia, also known as the Arab conquest of Iran, during the Rashidun Caliphate from 633 to 654 AD. This conquest brought the fall of the Sassanid Empire, which was in power for over 4 centuries, while rivaling its neighbor, the Eastern Roman Empire of Byzantine. Start of Chapter 11. The Night of Qadisiyyah. There was to be no rest this night. Night came but not darkness, because there was a bright moon. The experience of battle was so harrowing that men were gripped by a kind of insanity, hypnotized by the prospect of destruction from which they could not recoil. So the fighting continued, with Muslim and Persian giving as well as they took and neither, although approaching total exhaustion, showing any weakening of resolve or flagging of spirit. After a while there was a lull in the fighting, and Saad hoped that he would be able to re-establish some sort of control over the situation and get things better organized. He had no intention of allowing the Persians, or for that matter, his own men any peace this night, and was fully determined to slog away until victory was achieved. In sheer stamina, the hardy Arab of the desert would outlast the more civilized Persian. Saad planned, however, to launch his attack according to a proper design, following a proper program, but this was not to be. The Muslim contingents went into the assault on their own, without waiting for the orders of their commander-in-chief, or even his permission. This was not so much a lull in the fighting as a lowering of frequency, and it had not lasted long before Kaka led the Bani Tamim into a fresh attack. Other contingents followed suit, each leader exhorting his tribe to be foremost in glory, and Saad could do nothing but accept philosophically the reports which his officers brought him about the various tribes going into action. Each time he would raise his hands in supplication and invoke God's blessings on the tribe in question. The madness was upon them again. They were like two mighty bulls, pushing and heaving with horns locked, neither willing nor able to disentangle them. Very soon the confusion became total. Saad and Rustam were both cut off from battle, both helpless spectators of a contest over which neither could exercise the slightest control. The hour of midnight came, and with it a maddened, bleeding world staggered into Sunday. And it was at this time that Saad thought he saw a glimmer of victory when an officer conveyed to him a verse which Kaka had just uttered. We have slaughtered a nation and more, in 4s and 5s and 1s. But the hope was illusory, for no change was evident in the situation, and then even the flow of information ceased and both commanders-in-chief were left equally in the dark, with the control of battle decentralized to the level of the individual soldier, on whom everything now depended. All night, till the morning, the battle raged. Never again would such a night be lived in the Persian campaign. The shouts and screams of the combatants turned the night into a hell of sound. It was like a fantastic blacksmith's shop with steel striking steel, like a mad choral symphony in which no voice could be distinguished. This night was to become known as the Night of Snarls. Through the night the battle raged. In the excitement of combat, men who were hungry and thirsty forgot their hunger and thirst. Men who were tired forgot their fatigue. They were brave men, these Arabs and Persians, men who knew not fear and were now beyond fear. They knew that there could be life only in victory, that there could be no yielding. They gave no quarter, and neither accepted nor received any. They could do anything but cut and slash and stab and thrust. And so they struggled till daybreak on the same battle lines as on the previous morning. At sunrise again the fighting ceased, and the belligerents found that for all their efforts and sufferings, neither side had gained or lost a yard of ground. This time it was not a case of the fighting being stopped. It just died down because the warriors were not able to go on. Without plans, without orders, the Muslims gradually disengaged and stepped back out of bow range about a quarter of a mile, where they stopped, not knowing what to do. The Persian wall seemed impregnable, but they were too dazed, too tired to think. If some hoped that there would be a nice long rest, during which their bloody limbs would be washed and dressed, their women would bring a drink of nice cold water and a meal of nice hot food, they were mistaken. With men like Kaka around, there would be no rest while there was good fighting to be enjoyed. The night of snarls gave way to the night of Qadisiyyah. It meant day, however, because among the Arabs the 24-hour day was called not day, but night, and started at sunset, and the night preceded the day. It was the fourth day of battle, and so far as the soldiers knew, might not be the last. The organization of the two armies had none of the splendor and color of the first day. Their ranks were thinner, their lines dented, and the soldiers did not stand so erect or look so smart. But, as if propelled by fate, they waited for whatever was to happen, and what happened on the Muslim side was Kaka. Kaka had not slept a wink for 3 nights, and if anyone had struggled harder and killed more enemies in this battle, historians have made no mention of him. But now Kaka drew his men to him and said, "There is defeat for the enemy after an hour if we start again, so be patient for an hour and then attack once more. Lo, victory springs from steadfastness, so choose steadfastness over grief." His words were carried to other tribal contingents and the other chiefs, knowing that Kaka would steal a march on them if he could, got their men prepared to start attacking again. Amr bin Malik Arib, Qais bin Abd Yahuk, Qais bin Hubayra, Ashas bin Qais, Tulayha, all spoke to their men in similar vein, and the spirit of the officers, hardened by a determination to win, transmitted itself to the rank and file. Meanwhile, Saad and Rustam were able to re-establish a degree of control over their corps, and while Rustam busied himself with putting his corps and regiments in order with a defensive posture, Saad began to plan his next attack. His control over the army was not sufficiently strong for him to give detailed orders. All he could do was to lay down directions of attack, and this he did as follows. The Kinda and the Bajila, under Ashas and Jarir, the strongest contingents in the Muslim right center and right wing respectively, would attack from the right and break through the Persian left flank. On the Muslim left, Amr would similarly attack the Persian right flank. The rest of the army would attack frontally. The Muslim wings and center would meet behind the Persian center in a converging movement. Kaka was the first to start when, in about the middle of the morning, he led his men against the Persian center. He was followed by the rest of the Muslim regiments of the center, and the last to go into action were the Muslim wings, which had to shift their position to engage the Persian flanks. Ashas bin Qas, leading 700 men of the Kinda, came up against a Turkish regiment which resisted stubbornly, but was at last driven back from its position. For some time the battle again degenerated into a butchery, and there were signs that it would be fought to a standstill with heavy losses to both sides. But now, for the first time in the past 24 hours, signs of weakness appeared in the Persian front. Their right under Hormuzan and the left center were pushed back as a result of the flanking movement. But after withdrawing a short distance, they reformed their ranks and stood their ground. And so the situation remained till about noon, when Kaka pierced the Persian center, and as the Persians scattered before his regiment, made a dash for the Persian headquarters. Rustam sat upon his throne and waited. He hoped that his army would be able to wear down the Muslims sufficiently for them to suspend their attack, but he also feared that the Muslim pressure was becoming well nigh unbearable. He had sustained on his person many wounds and displayed an example of professional skill and personal courage which few generals could surpass. And then the sounds of fighting at the Persian center came closer, and with these sounds came the dust storm. The storm appeared in the west and blew eastwards. The trampling of tens of thousands of feet had raised a cloud of dust, which hung over the battlefield as the belligerents fought in its shadow. Now the storm raised more dust, and waves of it were blown in the faces of the Persians. The dust swirled around Persian and Muslim. The storm had assumed serious proportions by the time it reached Rustam, and it picked up the canopy which had been erected over his throne, carried it like a huge bird in the air, and dropped it in the Atik. Rustam, no longer under shelter, dismounted from his throne. He was alone. The last of his guards and his personal staff had been thrown into action. There was not an officer to talk to, not a messenger to carry his orders and bring him information, not an attendant to see to the needs of the top general of the empire. The commander-in-chief moved a short distance towards the rear, where a mule loaded with 2 saddle boxes carrying his personal possessions stood in unperturbed silence. Rustam sat on the earth on one side of the mule. Kaka and his men stumbled upon the throne and found it unoccupied. They were at a loss to understand the disappearance of Rustam, but assumed that it would not be possible to find him. One Muslim, however, Hilal bin Ulafa, moved on, looking for nothing in particular, and saw the mule without noticing Rustam. The dust had reduced visibility considerably, and Rustam too was unaware of the approach of any enemy. Hilal got to the mule and struck with his sword at the rope which held the saddle boxes across the top of the mule. The rope was cut, and the boxes fell to the ground, one of them on top of Rustam. It was only now that the Persian general realized his danger, and realized also that the battle of Qadisiyyah was, for all purposes, over. He got up at once and ran towards the river, while Hilal, hardly believing his luck at finding Rustam, gave chase. Rustam got to the bank and threw himself into the Atik, but the Muslim jumped in after him and brought him out onto the dry bank. Then, drawing his sword, he struck several vicious blows at the forehead and face of his victim, mutilating it almost beyond recognition. Next, he dragged the corpse along the ground and threw it under the feet of the mule. Hilal ascended the throne of the dead general and called to those Muslims who were within earshot. By the Lord of the Kaaba, I have killed Rustam. To me, to me. Thus died the illustrious Rustam, shorn of dignity at the hands of a common soldier. He deserved better. The Persian army remained unaware of the death of Commander-in-Chief, and being unaware of its tragic loss, went on struggling against the attacking army. The storm passed, taking away the dust and clearing the air as if preparing the stage for the final bloody act in this drama. Yet the Persians held on grimly. Their army was actually very near collapse, but this collapse would come not from weakness or wearing down, but from the high tension which had been generated by the fierce combat, and which would suddenly snap. It was early in the afternoon when the Muslims put in another determined attack. Kaka was already at the Persian headquarters, and the Persian wings had been pressed back. Now the army of Islam attacked as one man, and the fighting reached its climax along the semicircle in which the Persian army had been forced. The mood of the Persian soldier reached its peak as he put up a last heroic resistance, and then the Persian front broke into pieces. The Persian center collapsed, and the men fled in panic towards the river. The chained men, 15,000 at the start of battle, stumbled along to escape the pursuing Arabs, but both were so tired that the pursuers could move no faster than the pursued. These soldiers arrived at the bank of the Atik. Those who were in line with the dam began to cross the river, but not many had passed when the Muslim center arrived to pounce upon their backs. The Persians were trapped between the river and the Muslims, and regarding the former as the lesser of the two evils, plunged into the water. The Muslims pricked with their long spears those of the Persians who were near the bank, and they died of their wounds. The remainder, weighed down by their armor and chains, were drowned in the river. Of the original 15,000 stalwarts who had bravely put on chains, not one survived the battle. Jalinus, the commander of the Persian right center, noticed the absence of orders from Rustam, at once assumed command of the Persian army, and ordered a general withdrawal towards the dam. Picking a strong group of warriors, he himself made for the dam whence he drove away the Muslims who were there and threw a defensive arc around its western end to keep it safe for use. Towards this perimeter, Persian units began to withdraw, and through it they crossed to safety. Troops of several Muslim contingents launched attacks to dislodge Jalinus, but the Persian rear guard held firm and repulsed all attacks. Meanwhile, other Persian units were fleeing in other directions. A large number of Persians, however, were unable or unwilling to retreat. Many had reached a stage of exhaustion where neither the body nor the spirit cared what happened, and the closing stages of this battle saw scenes at once tragic and heroic. More than 30 proud regiments of the imperial army refused to flee and preferred death to life. They were cut down to a man. One regiment actually dug its standard firmly in the ground so that there could be no question of removing it, and the men, having given up the struggle, sat around it, swearing that they would die by their standard. They did. The Muslims, seeing that victory was theirs, now brought up their last reserve of strength and put in a last ferocious attack with sword and dagger. At length the vanquished who remained on the battlefield gave up even the pretense of resistance. There was nothing left in them, not even a desire to live. Often a Muslim would beckon to a Persian to come to him, and the Persian would come and stand still to be killed. And sometimes a Muslim would stretch his hand, take the Persian's weapon, and kill him with his own weapon. In the savagery of this battle, the quality of mercy was the first casualty. The human body and the human spirit possess reserves of strength and courage which are seldom taxed to their full capacity. But there are moments when these reserves are exploited. In flight, or in the defense of pride or honor, or in the pursuit of a fleeing foe. Soldiers exhausted from long days of fighting and believing that they can go on no longer, often go on fighting and are surprised at their own ability to bear pain and hardship. And now these resources of strength and courage were once again tapped. Saad was a very hard taskmaster and possessed a sternness of character which would later get him into trouble with the Caliph. He was also a good judge of how far men could be driven. He sent immediate orders for Zuhra to move after the withdrawing Persians and pursue them on the road to Najaf. Zuhra, who had commanded the Muslim right center in battle, picked 300 of his toughest horsemen and made for the dam. There were not many more left with him in fit condition for a fast-moving operation. Meanwhile, Jalinus had done a commendable job under extremely adverse conditions, getting the remnants of the Persians across the dam to safety, and all this time Hormuzan had stood at the bridge over the main road to Najaf, supervising similar operations. Not too many Persians came to the dam, but those who did safely got across. And when no Persians remained in sight, Jalinus destroyed the dam and moved upstream along the east bank of the Atik. Arriving at the bridge, he took charge of operations from Hormuzan. Zohra got to the dam and found it destroyed. There was no trace of any organized Persian force across the river. Intending to give Jalinus no time to reorganize his army for another battle, Zohra jumped his horse into the river and, followed by his 300 riders, swam across to the east bank. Then he rode along the bank and caught up with Jalinus at the bridge. Here a short action was fought in which Jalinus repulsed the Muslim attack. The bulk of the Persian survivors had already gone up towards Najaf, and Jalinus kept with him a body of cavalry, whose strength is not known, to deter and delay pursuit by the Muslims. After a short while, Jalinus broke contact and retreated northwards at a fast pace, leaving the bridge intact. Zohra followed, determined not to let his quarry out of sight. And so pursuer and pursued moved towards Najaf, both suffering from exhaustion and yet wary of the tricks that the other might play. The Persian horse went past Kharara while the foot soldiers either dispersed or were cut down by Zohra. About halfway between Kharara and Sailahun, Jalinus turned at bay. There was still plenty of fight left in him, and he could think of no better way of discouraging a Muslim pursuit than by killing the commander of the pursuit column. And there was no more chivalrous way of killing the Muslim commander than by doing it himself. Further retreat like a hunted animal was foreign to his gallant nature, and he decided that now was the moment to end the action, once and for all, either in death or in glory. Throwing his cavalry hastily into battle position, Jalinus rode forward and threw a challenge for single combat with the Muslim commander. From the Muslim front, Zohra emerged. Two very tired generals fought a duel, and the noble Jalinus met his death at the hands of an equally noble opponent. As Jalinus fell, the Persians turned and fled, closely followed by the Muslims. The pursuit continued up to Najaf, and all the way large numbers of stragglers were killed by Zohra's riders. Najaf was reached after sunset, and a little later, as night fell, Zohra turned about and led his column back, marching all night and arriving at Qadisiyyah shortly before dawn. Soon after the departure of Zohra in pursuit of Jalinus, Saad had sent two other columns to pursue scattered parties of Persians. One, under Shurahbil bin As-Samt, was sent north and the other, under Kaka, was sent south. The two columns moved out on horseback. Many stragglers were overtaken in the villages through which these columns passed, and all were at once dispatched. The columns were back in camp by nightfall. A strange calm descended upon the battlefield. Where there had been a storm of noise and a hurricane of movement for 4 action-packed days, there was now silence and stillness. The declining sun looked down upon a scene of desolation and carnage which few battles have produced in history. What had appeared an endless nightmare to the soldiers had at last ended, leaving nightmarish evidence of its passing. All over the plain the dead lay where they had fallen, alone and in heaps, their sightless eyes staring at the infinity of death. Bodies of Muslims, Zoroastrians, pagans, lay entangled in a last terrible embrace from which none could separate. No longer Arab and Persian, but just broken, twisted, mutilated bodies, lying in grotesque shapes and postures. In that they bore witness that they had been brave men, and had laid down their lives for a cause which for them was more important than life. And their broken swords and lances paid eloquent tribute to their valor. The only sound which disturbed the stillness was the groans of the wounded. Then suddenly other, less warlike sounds were heard on the battlefield, sounds of women and children who rushed up from the Muslim camps. They came with water-skins and rough bandages to slake the thirst and alleviate the pain of the Muslim wounded. They also put an end to the sufferings of the Persian wounded, though in less merciful ways. A total of 6,000 Muslims died in battle, and few were those who did not carry wounds on their persons. All the martyrs were buried in the valley of Musharraq, in crude graves hastily prepared for them. The number of Persian casualties is not accurately recorded. We are told that the 15,000 chained men were all killed, and on just the last day, 10,000 Persians lost their lives, excluding the chained men. Since 10,000 are believed to have died during the first 2 days of fighting, a fair estimate would place the Persian casualties at not less than 40,000. That is 2/3 of the entire army. Many of the top generals had fallen with honor on the battlefield. Rustam, Bahman, Birzan, Jalinus, as also others less well known. Some able ones survived to fight another day. Hormuzan, Qarin, Khusro Shanum. When Saad heard that Rustam had been killed by Hilal bin Ulafa, he sent for the man and questioned him about the Persian commander-in-chief. Hilal told him that he had left the general's body under the feet of the mule, not far from the place where Rustam's throne had stood. On Saad's orders, Hilal went and brought the body of Rustam, on which were found 100 wounds from sword and spear. All the possessions of the slain general were awarded to Hilal, who sold them for 70,000 dirhams. Just the cap of Rustam, as a general of the highest rank in the empire, was worth 100,000 dirhams. The booty taken at Qadisiyyah was vast. Khalid bin Urfuta, Saad's deputy commander in battle, was placed in charge of the spoils, and everything was properly collected and accounted for. After detaching 1/5 of the spoils for Medina as the share of the state, the remainder was distributed among the soldiers. Infantrymen received 7,000 dirhams each, and cavalrymen 14,000. The Dirafshe-Kavian, the fabulous standard of the Sassanese, made of tiger skin and covered with pearls and sapphires and other gems, was taken by and consequently awarded to Zarar bin al-Khattab, and was sold by him for 30,000 dirhams. Actually its worth, according to one estimate, was 1,200,000, and according to another, 2,200,000. The 4 sons of the old woman mentioned in an earlier chapter returned safe and sound to their mother, having earned the admiration of their fellow men in battle, and laid at her feet their share of the spoils, which she happily returned to them, regarding her own sons as her greatest treasure. The blood had not dried on the plain of Qadisiyyah when Saad wrote a letter to the Caliph. Lo, Allah has given us victory over the Persians after a long battle and a terrible earthquake. The Muslims met numbers such as chroniclers have not heard of, but their numbers proved of no use to them, and Allah gave their possessions to the Muslims. And the Muslims pursued them over rivers and across strongholds and along narrow paths. He also gave an account of the casualties and mentioned some of the better known of the dead. He then sent for Sa'd bin Umayla of the Bani Fazara, a clan of the tribe of Ghatfan living north of Medina, and instructed him to proceed with all speed to Medina, deliver the letter to the Caliph, and tell him all that he knew about the battle. The battle having just ended, others could just fall to the ground where they stood and rest and sleep as long as they wished, but not Sa'd bin Umayla. There was no time for him to rest. He would have to set off straight away on the desert road to Medina, bearing tidings of victory. The courier accepted the commander's letter, saddled a fast camel, hastily collected provisions for the journey, and took the first step in a journey of 1,000 miles. The journey to Medina would normally take 3 to 4 weeks, depending upon the purpose of the journey and the endurance of the traveler. It is not known how long the courier took to cover the distance, but at last he arrived in sight of the Muslim capital. Exhausted from his long journey along the sandy road across some of the most desolate desert country in the world, for he had not spared himself, he found the sight of the Prophet's city refreshing. He urged his tired camel on, anxious to complete his mission. When about 2 miles from Medina, the courier came upon a man sitting by the roadside who stood up at the approach of the camel rider. He was a very tall and broad-shouldered man with a powerful physique and a strong, intelligent face. Yet he wore a long, coarse shirt of the cheapest material, patched in several places. There was something contradictory about the man. He was dressed like a beggar, but there was nothing beggar-like about him. The rider did not know that this man had for the past several weeks walked every morning to this spot, watched the road to Iraq expectantly, and then returned to Medina at noon. "From where do you come?" asked the tall man. "From Iraq," replied Sa'd bin Umayla. The face of the tall man lit up. "O slave of Allah," he said, "tell me all." "Allah has given the Muslims victory, and the Persians are defeated." The tall man was beside himself with joy. "Glory be to Allah," he exclaimed, and repeated the words several times. And since the camel rider had not stopped his mount, being eager to get to Medina and see the Caliph, rather than waste time talking to a man who probably had nothing better to do, the tall man fell in beside him and kept pace with the courier at a steady jog. The rest of the journey passed quickly, with the rider giving an account of the Battle of Qadisiyyah and the tall man throwing in questions to keep him going. Sa'd bin Umayla noticed that the man was about 50 and that the hair was thinning on his large head. Yet he ran as if a 2-mile run was something he would do every day for the fun of it. There was something definitely unusual about the man. The physique of a powerful warrior, the personality of a forceful leader, and the clothes of a wretched beggar. The two went on. They entered Medina. At once a crowd gathered around them. No one knew Sa'd bin Umayla, but they all seemed to know the tall man. They hailed him. Peace be upon you, O Commander of the Faithful. And again, Peace be upon you, O Commander of the Faithful. At last the courier knew who his companion was. He turned in amazement to the tall man. Glory be to Allah, and may Allah bless you, he said. Why did you not tell me that you were Commander of the Faithful? My brother, replied Caliph Umar, you are not to blame. End of chapter 11.